Fact of Life 3. We don't figure out how things work. We muddle through. One of the things that becomes obvious as soon as you do any usability testing, whether you're testing websites, software, or household appliances, is the extent to which people use things all the time without understanding how they work, or with completely wrong-headed ideas about how they work. Faced with any sort of technology, very few people take the time to read instructions. Instead, we forge ahead and muddle through, making up our own vaguely plausible stories about what we're doing and why it works. It often reminds me of the scene at the end of The Prince and the Pauper, where the real prince discovers that the look-alike pauper has been using the Great Seal of England as a nutcracker in his absence. It makes perfect sense to him. The seal is just this great big, heavy chunk of metal. The Prince and the Pauper Classics Illustrated. And the fact is, we get things done that way. I've seen lots of people use software, websites, and consumer products effectively in ways that are nothing like what the designers intended. Take the web browser, for instance, a crucial part of internet use. To people who build websites, it's an application that you use to view web pages. But if you ask users what a browser is, usually a box with the word Google next to it. A lot of people think Google is the internet. And muddling through is not limited to beginners. Even technically savvy users often have surprising gaps in their understanding of how things work. I wouldn't be surprised if even Mark Zuckerberg and Sergey Brin have some bits of technology in their lives that they use by muddling through. Why does this happen? It's not important to us. For most of us, it doesn't matter to us whether we understand how things work, as long as we can use them. It's not for lack of intelligence, but for lack of caring. It's just not important to us. 3. Web developers often have a particularly hard time understanding and even believing that people might feel this way, since they themselves are usually keenly interested in how things work. If we find something that works, we stick to it. Once we find something that works, no matter how badly, we tend not to look for a better way. We'll use a better way if we stumble across one, but we seldom look for one. It's always interesting to watch designers and developers observe their first usability test. The first time they see a user click on something completely inappropriate, they're surprised. For instance, when the user ignores a nice big fat software button in the navigation bar, saying something like, "Well, I'm looking for software. So I guess I'd click here on cheap stuff because cheap is always good." The user may even find what he's looking for eventually. But by then the people watching don't know whether to be happy or not. The second time it happens, they're yelling, "Just click on software." The third time, you can see them thinking, "Why are we even bothering?" And it's a good question if people manage to muddle through so much, does it really matter whether they get it? The answer is that it matters a great deal, because while muddling through may work sometimes, it tends to be inefficient and error-prone. On the other hand, if users get it, there's a much better chance that they'll find what they're looking for, which is good for them and for you. There's a better chance that they'll understand the full range of what your site has to offer, not just the parts that they stumble across. You have a better chance of steering them to the parts of your site that you want them to see. They'll feel smarter and more in control when they're using your site, which will bring them back. You can get away with a site that people muddle through only until someone builds one down the street that makes them feel smart. If life gives you lemons. Designing for scanning, not reading. If you /don't know /whose signs /these are you can't have /driven very far Burma shave. Sequence of roadside billboards promoting shaving cream, circa 1935. Faced with the fact that your users are whizzing by, there are some important things you can do to make sure they see and understand as much of what they need to know and of what you want them to know as possible. Take advantage of conventions, create effective visual hierarchies, break pages up into clearly defined areas, make it obvious what's clickable, eliminate distractions, format content to support. Scanning conventions are your friends. One of the best ways to make almost anything easier to grasp in a hurry is to follow the existing conventions, widely used or standardized design patterns. For example, stop signs. Given how crucial it is that drivers see and recognize them at a glance, at a distance, in all kinds of weather and lighting conditions, it's a really good thing that all stop signs look the same. Some of the specifics may vary from country to country, but overall they're remarkably consistent around the world. Where things will be located on a page. For example, users expect the logo identifying the site to be in the top left corner, at least in countries where reading is left to right, and the primary navigation to be across the top or down the left side. How things work. For example, almost all sites that sell products use the metaphor of a shopping cart and a very similar series of forms for specifying things like your method of payment, your shipping address, and so on. How things look. Many elements have a standardized appearance, like the icon that tells you it's a link to a video, the search icon, and the social networking sharing options. Conventions have also evolved for different kinds of site as commerce, colleges, blogs, restaurants, movies, and many more, since all the sites in each category have to solve the same set of problems. Citizenmovie.com. These conventions didn't just come out of thin air, they all started life as somebody's bright idea. If an idea works well enough, other sites imitate it, and eventually enough people have seen it in enough places that it needs no explanation. When applied well, web conventions make life easier for users because they don't have to constantly figure out what things are and how they are supposed to work as they go from site to site. One problem with conventions, though designers are often reluctant to take advantage of them. Faced with the prospect of following a convention, there's a great temptation for designers to try reinventing the wheel instead. Largely because they feel, not incorrectly, that they've been hired to do something new and different, not the same old thing. Not to mention the fact that praise from peers, awards, and high-profile job offers are rarely based on criteria like best use of conventions. Occasionally, time spent reinventing the wheel results in a revolutionary new rolling device. But usually it just amounts to time spent reinventing the wheel. If you're going to innovate, you have to understand the value of what you're replacing, or as Dylan put it, to live outside the law, you must be honest. And it's easy to underestimate just how much value conventions provide. The classic example is custom scroll bars. Whenever a designer decides to create scroll bars from scratch, usually to make them prettier, results almost always make it obvious that the designer never thought about how many hundreds or Thousands of hours of fine-tuning went into the evolution of the standard operating system scroll bars. If you're not going to use an existing web convention, you need to be sure that what you're replacing it with either is so clear and self-explanatory that there's no learning curve, so it's as good as the convention, or B, adds so much value that it's worth a small learning curve. My recommendation: innovate when you know you have a better idea, but take advantage of conventions when you don't. Don't get me wrong, I'm not in any way trying to discourage creativity. I love innovative and original web design. One of my favorite examples is Harlem.org. The whole site is built around Art Kane's famous photo of 57 jazz musicians, taken on the steps of a brownstone in Harlem in August 1957. Instead of text, links or menus, you use the photo to navigate the site. Not only is it innovative and fun, but it's easy to understand and use. And the creators were smart enough to understand that the fun might wear off after a while, so they also included a more conventional category-based navigation. You can also browse the musicians by name, instrument, or jazz style. The rule of thumb is that you can should be as creative and innovative as you want, and add as much aesthetic appeal as you can, as long as you make sure it's still usable. And finally, a word about consistency. You often hear consistency cited as an absolute good. People win a lot of design arguments just by saying we can't do that. It wouldn't be consistent. Consistency is always a good thing to strive for within your site or app. If your navigation is always in the same place, for instance, I don't have to think about it or waste time looking for it. But there. Clarity. Create effective visual hierarchies. Another important way to make pages easy to grasp in a hurry is to make sure that the appearance of the things on the page are of the visual cues accurately.